So, hello again. For some of us, it's morning. For some of us, it's evening. Wherever we are in the world, welcome. Wonderful to be together. So, continuing this discussion of the 5 precepts, keeping us safely on the path. Our third day, and so this morning I would like to talk about the third lay precept. For the sake of our training together, I undertake the precept to abstain from sexual misconduct. And to discuss that in terms of a teaching that I often hear at IMC about ethical sensitivity. Ethical sensitivity. So maybe for 1,500 years or more, it's been very common, very traditional in the Theravadan Buddhist tradition and other Buddhist traditions to organize the teachings into 3 trainings and ordering them as if first we develop sila, ethics, virtue, precepts, restraint, and then samadhi, a second training, the training of the mind and heart and collectedness and concentration, and the third training of panya, wisdom, discernment. Very common to hear them developed in this order. And what's interesting is as we watch the development of the Buddha Dharma in the United States, certainly, many practitioners first encounter meditation. They first encounter the practices of samadhi and maybe of wisdom and discernment before finding their way into sila. And one of the ways this often happens, I see, is that through our mindfulness practice, we become more and more attuned to what's happening right here. What's happening right here in the body, what's happening in terms of emotion, what's happening in terms of thinking, and all the more attentive to our action and how we're influenced by all of these. Becoming more attuned to this, it's quite a natural movement, very often, to start to develop what we're calling ethical sensitivity. So in terms of the third precept, to abstain from sexual misconduct, it's noteworthy that the Buddha did a lot of his teaching to monastics, and that the monastic rules very clearly state that their practice for monastics was celibacy. He took this very seriously. Part of what this means for us, probably most all of us as lay practitioners, is that we have the task, if we want to live according to a Buddhist interpretation of wise sexuality or to abstain from sexual misconduct, it takes some interpretation on our part. How to apply this in our lives. So my inclination is to explore or to begin looking at a wise sexuality through the principles we've been looking at so far in the precepts. If you think back to the first day, and we have this teaching of the Buddha teaching Venerable Rahula to discern or reflect before, during, and after an action. Is this action going to do harm? Is it not going to do harm? Is this action skillful? Is it not skillful? And to apply those understandings, apply those principles to this very, very multifaceted, sometimes quite complicated world of our romantic life, our sexual life, with the understanding that mindfulness practice is fit for every area of our lives. And maybe to state it most softly, it sure can't hurt to bring our mindfulness into this realm of our life, sexuality. So I think it goes without saying, many of us are aware of all the many ways that we get caught in our sexuality, caught up, cause suffering for ourselves, cause suffering and stress for others. So I think we do well to examine, am I harming? Am I not? Am I skillful? Am I not? I think one of the close principles to examine when we're looking at our own sexuality, I think many of us can relate to, is the difference or the distinction, the discernment between short-term pleasure and our long-term happiness. Part of what's so fascinating about the influence of sexuality is the way that it can stir up the roots of delusion or a kind of blindness, or the passions can get so activated as to influence us to operate out of greed or operate out of even ill will. So we see how sexuality can be very closely tied to these three: delusion, greed, ill will. And these in turn can grow into other unwholesome conduct, harmful conduct. It may sound a little, I don't know how you'll receive this idea. But here, we'll do it this way. You can imagine yourself floating along in a river stream, floating along on your back, just flowing along, comfortable temperature of the water, carried along. And so long as you're floating, you don't notice just how strong the flow of the river is, how strong the pull of the tide is. And then you decide as you're floating there, I'm going to stand up. I'm going to put my feet on the riverbed. And so you do. You put your feet on the riverbed and you decide, I'm going to stand still here in the middle of the stream. And when you plant your feet, only then do you see, feel, sense just the utter power of this river, the utter power of this stream, the pushing of the water, and how much force it takes to not be pushed downstream. I think this can very closely be related to the influence of sexuality on our lives, or the pull toward how sexuality can influence us. It's just amazing that as we float along in the currents of, say, sexual impulse or sexual behavior or a romantic life, if we do it in an unreflective way, we can just be swept along, totally swept along, and not notice how powerful its influence is. But if we take up a practice, we may plant our feet and finally see, wow, look at all this force and influence and power that these impulses have on my heart and my mind, my activity. And one of the ways that we do this, or one of the traditional ways we do this, you might see it on retreat. Say for a 7-day retreat, we take up a practice for that set period to observe deliberate refraining from any sexual expression at all. We take up the practice for those 7 days to take up celibacy and to not express a sexuality. It's not an evaluation of sexual impulse or sexual behavior as wrong or bad or somehow misguided. I think we can see in a time such as that, when you've made a decision, a strong resolve, okay, I won't be taken away, swept away by sexuality for these 7 days, then you can really see the currents. Then you can really feel the pull on your life and see it all the more clearly. And And then as we see through mindfulness practice, as we see more clearly, we have more opportunity to decide to live in a wholesome, skillful, non-harming way for our long-term benefit, for the long-term benefit of others, for the long-term benefit of the whole world. I think those are my reflections on this third precept for the morning. My sense now is, why don't we continue with our practice and recite the 5 precepts? And then we can even see what reflections or questions are coming up in the YouTube chat. So let me share this, and then we can chant together. There we go. So you can chant along or follow after me. For the sake of our training together, I undertake the precept to abstain from harming living beings. For the sake of our training together, I undertake the precept to abstain from taking what is not given. For the sake of our training together, I undertake the precept to abstain from sexual misconduct. For the sake of our training together, I undertake the precept to abstain from false speech. For the sake of our training together, I undertake the precept to abstain from intoxicants that are a cause for heedlessness. So may our reflections, may our practice, consideration of these precepts and considerations of how we can live wisely with our whole life, may that nourish us, support our Sangha, support the community. May all beings benefit. Please take good care. Until tomorrow.